standoff with police in 2017 at a Windsor home. This morning, the jury was given a list of 9 recommendations to consider. They can accept, reject, modify, and/or come up with recommendations of their own. Now, the first 4 recommendations are to the Windsor Police. They involve better information sharing and coordination among police teams. The list also suggests using 911 recordings by Romanek for training purposes. The rest of the recommendations are to Windsor Regional Hospital and Hotel du Grace Hospital. They include having 24-hour access to the mental health addiction urgent care clinic for people in crisis, having a standardized definition of wait times in the emergency department, and establishing targets for timely access to mental health and addiction services. Lawyers on both sides agreed to the fact that Romanek killed himself in the garage of the home during a standoff with police. Officers were there to arrest him on a charge of attempted murder. If the jury makes recommendations, there's no obligation. The institutions named can make any of those changes. We'll keep you updated on the jury recommendations as they are released. The Greater Essex County District School Board is looking at inventive ways to help deal with its current budget deficit.
We are also will be implementing a purchasing freeze. Every individual department is buying office supplies. Well, maybe if I need paper clips, and I'm oversimplifying this, but maybe I should just walk upstairs and see if the academic department has it. So we're literally getting that granular.
The board says it will also adjust thermostats by 2 degrees to save on energy costs. This will happen at all school board buildings. Officials are suggesting staff and students wear heavier sweaters in the colder months and lighter clothing in the summer. All of this is to help them cope with an $8.9 million budget deficit this year. The board says the deficit is a result of inflation across categories of board spending. The board received ministry approval to run a deficit of up to 2%. That's to be covered by operating surplus, but a depleting surplus means they won't have that same option next year. Officials are warning of difficult decisions in next year's budget. In order to stop people from taking photos of the eclipse, international border crossings in our region say they'll be stepping up patrols on Monday. The Ambassador Bridge says more of its workers will be on hand to ensure traffic flow isn't disrupted. The Blue Water Bridge in Sarnia put out a warning saying travelers will be prohibited from stopping and taking photos on the bridge, and construction will continue as normal on the Gordie Howe Bridge. Officials say safety about the eclipse has been a part of daily safety meetings. There's a lot to know about the eclipse that will be seen in our area on Monday. We've put together a video with all the information you're going to need leading up to the big event. By now, you've probably heard there's a major celestial event that's passing through our region on April 8th, and we've been telling you it's a big deal, but we wanted to show you why. So eclipses happen across the world yearly, but what makes it so unique is being in the same location as one, and Monday will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In fact, the chance of seeing what will take place on April 8th won't come again for another 375 years because we're going to experience a total eclipse. So let me show you what that is. This here is the moon. This large tennis ball is the Earth, and the light, well, picture that as sunlight. So right now the sun is shining down on Windsor, Essex County, but during an eclipse, the moon slides in front of the sun, blocking out the rays, and you get this blackout, which we are going to experience on the 8th. The moon and the sun have to be the perfect distance from each other in order to do this because the moon is so much smaller than the sun. And totality is rare. According to NASA's lead eclipse expert, only about 1% of the Earth's surface experiences it. In fact, Windsor won't see quite a total eclipse, but Kingsville, Leamington, Colchester, and Point Pelee will. The map shows that narrow band of total shadow that will pass over parts of the county. Of course, the better the weather, the better the view. Cloudy conditions could play a major role in what we are able to see. But it's going to get dark, like dusk or dawn dark, and the temperatures could drop by about 10 degrees. Now, the eclipse is supposed to start at around 1:59 p.m. and go to 4:29 p.m. And that total eclipse is supposed to happen around 3:13, 3:17. As exciting as this day is going to be, public officials are warning people of the safety risks. Now, the Windsor, Essex County Public and Catholic School Boards will be ending classes early for the day, and some municipalities are stepping up their emergency services. But the most important thing you can do if you want to participate in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity is get a pair of these solar eclipse glasses. And not only will they keep your eyes safe, but they're also going to leave you looking pretty cool. CBC News is working on some special coverage for Monday, the day of the eclipse. It kicks off at 6 a.m. Morning Live with Heather Hiscox will be live from Niagara Falls. Then at 1 p.m., a CBC News special titled The Eclipse in Canada will begin. You can watch both of those programs on cbc.ca/Windsor, on the CBC News app, CBC TV, and streaming on CBC Gem and CBC Explore. Colette, I had mentioned those cloudy conditions will impact what we're going to see Monday. And as of right now, it's looking like a bit of a nail biter. Is it too early for you to give us some information?
It is a bit of a nail biter. And I tell you what, I can't see anything at this moment in the studio with my, but I'm ready, glasses. So let me just remove those and let's get into it. And it is a bit of a nail biter, but it's still, 5 days away. So we have time for this forecast to change a little bit, but I do think it's worth beginning to look at. And of course, as you just saw in Meg's report there, we're just kind of outside that path of totality, but it's still going to be very, very impressive at about 95%. So nearly seeing the moon covering the sun in terms of what we will get into. So in terms of the forecast, yes, I do have clouds, and this is one of the model projections. The GFS model shows all of this cloud cover kind of pushing all the way across the Niagara region too. Niagara Falls is an area of totality folks going to. And yes, some of the clouds around Leamington, of course, as well, where you're looking at totality. But I am anticipating at this time anyway that some of this is just some high cloud, which will be thinner cloud and we can see through. Even if we get into some mid-level cloud, we can usually do okay with that. I was in Nashville in 2017 for totality there with that eclipse, and it was a fair weather day, but with quite a few clouds, and we just had to keep waiting for them to part, which they did, to see it. So, each day we're going to keep looking at this and diving into the forecast, looking ahead. This is what's happening now, okay? This is a 3-hour summary of what's been happening with what are mostly rain showers through southwestern Ontario. Whole different story into eastern Ontario with the snowfall, but temperatures mild enough that that's what we are looking at here. And a little bit of, yes, getting some, not necessarily hail, but some graupel when you get some of that melting of the snow crystals and then super cooled water forming on them. So we've seen a bit of that too. 7 degrees currently, though. We have our winds coming in out of the northeast, not super strong. They're going to be gusting, though, tomorrow, 30, 40 kilometers an hour. So they will be picking up again. Even tonight, we'll be seeing that. And as the temperature falls off very close to freezing tonight, getting into some mixing or wet flurries. You'd think by tomorrow we were out of the influence of this system, but there's still going to be not only cloud cover, but some wraparound. Pretty isolated. I mean, mostly it's dry or it's just some drizzle, but still, even tomorrow afternoon and early evening, that potential for that isolated shower or wet flurry. Saturday, it's going to take time, 3 o'clock in the afternoon before we're really seeing it breaking up, but we should get some sun coming through before that, and then we get into much better clearing. As for what's left, mostly it's some drizzle, but maybe a few millimeters in a few pockets there. 3 degrees tonight. 8 degrees tomorrow in terms of that daytime high, but look at the weekend and how much better we're going to be doing with those temperatures. And even if they dip for a little bit as we get into the eclipse on Monday, Meg, still some really nice temperatures then too.
Can't wait to see you in those glasses again. Thanks so much for that, Colette.
You're welcome.
Coming up, there's been a start delay for an electric vehicle production plant in Oakville. We have more on that after the break. Automaker Ford is delaying the start of electric vehicle production in Oakville. Almost a year ago, the U.S. company said it planned to spend nearly $2 billion to retool an existing plant. And both the federal and Ontario government had pledged close to $300 million each in funding. CBC's Philip Lee Shannock has the details and reaction.
Ford is not saying how many of the nearly 3,000 workers at the plant will be affected. But the Auto Workers Union says delays at the company's electric vehicle plant will be a devastating blow to its members.
It's just deeply disappointing that we were just in bargaining last fall, nailed down timelines, and now those timelines are changed.
Payne says the union will work with Ford to mitigate the effects of the delay. The company says it still plans to produce a 7-seat EV at the plant, just 2 years later than the 2025 target. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association explains why Ford is slowing EV production, despite huge investments by automakers and hefty government subsidies.
The question is, will consumer demand move at the pace of these investments? Automakers don't control the consumer. We have to build out the supports to help more consumers make that switch and make the jump into electric.
Add a very complicated retooling of the factories, and he says Ford is slowing its plans, but it's not alone. Stellantis' Brampton assembly plant began 2024 with layoffs as it gets the factory ready to build electric vehicles. After a big jump, auto industry analysts have seen a deceleration in demand for EVs as affordability, range anxiety, and lack of charging infrastructure weigh on everyday consumers.
I'm not suggesting EVs won't become successful. I'm just saying that there's still significant reluctance and resistance by consumers.
And while provinces and the federal government try to incentivize consumers through subsidies and regulations, and manufacturers invest in an EV market they had hoped was just around the corner, it's clear that when it comes to actually buying an electric vehicle, consumers will be going at their own pace. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
Schools across Canada are dealing with severe teacher shortages, leaving principals to make some tough choices about how the learning day will unfold for students, and that risks leaving some behind. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson takes a closer look behind the problem.
Start formulating a plan. And,
this former principal knows the scramble when a lot of teachers call in sick.
Do I combine classes? Do I cancel music for the day? Will I have to teach a class? Will I have to cancel prep time for teachers?
And the kids feel the effect of it.
When those trusting relationships are negatively impacted, we tend to see some very, concerning things. We see changes in behavior.
The Ontario-based advocacy group People for Education surveyed more than 1,000 principals in the province who painted a grim picture of just how bad the situation is. 24% of elementary and 35% of secondary schools report facing daily shortages in teaching staff. And it's not just in Ontario.
We are having evidence surfacing from across the country.
This education professor says while there were shortages before the pandemic, COVID-19 made the situation worse.
So if there was this group who were close to retirement who sought early retirement, so that reduced the number of available teachers in schools. Equally, teachers who had recently retired, who in a typical situation would return to supply or substitute teach once or twice or 3 times a week, they were not returning into schools during COVID because they didn't want to put themselves at risk.
And we had our meeting with MFA schools yesterday.
Just this February, Newfoundland and Labrador brought together both the teachers and government officials to tackle the problem.
We do have some housing units available in some of our communities for our teachers, and in others we do a housing stipend, which gives them a portion towards their rent.
But even there, the teacher union said in a statement the government's efforts fell short, underfunding key problem areas like packed classrooms and violence in schools. As teacher shortages proves to be an equation few know how to solve. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Coming up, we have alarming CCTV footage of when a massive earthquake shook Taiwan. Stay tuned. Taiwan has experienced its strongest earthquake in 25 years. Here's some CCTV footage from yesterday. The video shows people inside a maternity center trying to protect newborn babies when the quake struck. As staff members struggled to hold on to the wobbling cots, more rushed in to help. The supervisor says it was scary, but everyone's natural instincts kicked in. Wednesday's quake mainly hit a sparsely populated area in East Taiwan. 10 people died and more than 1,000 others were injured on the island. The latest report from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says housing starts are expected to decline this year. That's due to the delayed effect of higher interest rates on new construction. The CMHC says new builds will start picking up again in 2025 and 2026 and could hit peak levels and set new highs. Home prices and sales will also rise, driven by high demand. Rental housing will remain in short supply, leading to higher rent costs and lower vacancy rates in coming years. Monday's eclipse is creating anticipation in the human world, but for all our animal friends, night-like conditions will come out of the blue. The CBC's Laura Meter looks at how they may react.
It's a normal day out here now, but on Monday at eclipse time, it will be much different out here. Christina Hare doesn't expect her dog to notice, but they won't be out here walking during it.
I'm not really concerned because she does sleep really well during the night, so I don't think it'll throw her off too much. She might have a nap, and I'll make sure to maybe not take her outside during that time.
Specialists in animal behavior say an eclipse can cause pets or farm animals to act differently, especially if they're already nervous.
This could set them off just a little bit. The big response that is reported is one of nonspecific fear or anxiety, simply because this is so uncertain.
Dr. Karen Overall says animals often act as they would at nighttime, but they might also think it's a storm, which could be stressful. For larger animals, having some kind of shelter or a barn can help. Trainers at this Charlottetown track plan to keep their horses in the barn, which is also a darker environment.
I'm not necessarily, I don't really know if it would harm them or not, but to be on the safe side, I just keep them in the barn and just when it kind of passes in, then kind of go about your everyday thing pretty well.
Miles Heffernan says it makes sense to protect human and animal eyes, and vets agree.
There are people who will have goggles for their dog.
This veterinarian says it is harder to control larger animals, but pets should be kept inside if they're at risk of looking at the sun.
Some animals are far more sensitive to different types of light than we are. So, you'd want to be a little careful there.
In the past, researchers have reported birds gathering on the ground and looking at the eclipse, and some primate animals in zoos have pointed at it, and cows have thought it's milking time. Experts say it's good to plan ahead to keep animals safe. Laura Meter, CBC News, Charlottetown.
That's it for CBC Windsor News. Don't forget, for news anytime, you can go to our website at cbc.ca/Windsor. That's also where you'll find details on the 15 jury recommendations in the Chad Romanek inquest later this evening. Those are being released right now. You can also download the CBC News app for stories that matter most to you. And don't forget to watch The National tonight at 9 on CBC News Network, 10 p.m. on the CBC News app, CBC TV, and streaming on CBC Gem and CBC Explore. Thanks so much for tuning in. Looking forward to seeing you back here tomorrow night.